It's nice to see the familiar faces that have survived the third year. That's wonderful. When did I take you guys? Last year? Yeah.
Me, it was my first year, 2016.
Wow, cool. If I don't recognize you, forgive me, because you ladies change your hair every 2 minutes. And that always fools me, but welcome. Okay. So today we've got 2 days together. We're going to be doing project management and operations. And here's my email address. If this thing works. Okay, wait, okay, there it is, okay. Most of you, I think, I've got it, but just take it if you've got any queries. So being here, I assume you've all passed 2 years of finance, eh? Yes. Okay, otherwise you wouldn't be here, would you? Okay, cool. What are the important ground rules for us in this class? Let's start here, because you happen to be in front. Give me one ground rule. I'm going to go around to each table. What's an important ground rule for us to get the most out of these sessions, to benefit from these sessions? Give me the first ground rule. Answer. Participation is important. So that is an important ground rule. Thank you. Any others from this table? Okay, so you've been delegated as a spokesperson. Okay. You guys, give me a ground rule. Respect. That's what it's all about, isn't it? We can go and we can write lists of 20 ground rules, but it's respect, isn't it? Respect for other people. Respect for other people's opinions. When someone talks, be it me or someone in the group, we listen. And from a project context, as you'll see when we go through, from a project management context, ground rules are everything in a team. And you've got to set your ground rules in the beginning. Because remember, you guys are going to an era where the chances of you working with people from different countries, parts of the world, are very good. Because we're in a global environment. And we've been having a series of HR forums, which I'll be going to, where employers, and I always ask HR managers that come there, what do you want from our graduates? And one of the important things that come up is the ability to work in teams. They're looking for people with initiative. They're looking for thinkers. The knowledge is out there. We can all get the knowledge. But the important thing are those characteristics, like working in a team. Just in South Africa, we're a land of diversity. Different tribes, different races, different stuff. And the secret is to come into a team and to work in a team and to contribute to a team and to understand different people's cultures, because people have different way of talking, different way of thinking. So you'll see in this book, there's quite a lot in this book on teamwork, on managing teams. So when you guys get more senior and you start managing teams, that's the difficult part, isn't it? Managing people. People are difficult. People have feelings. People have different thoughts. People have different perspectives. So what's important in project management, we'll touch it again in teamwork, is you set the ground rules. Because if you work in a team or you're in a class like this, it's a relationship, isn't it? It's a temporary relationship, because you're going to be together and then some of you will stay friends. A lot of you will go into different parts of the world, different jobs. And the one guy said to me, what's important for him, he's a recruiter for one of the big pharmaceutical companies. He said to me, what's important to him is that he can teach people skills, but he can't teach people attitude. So he might have a very brilliant person, but they cannot work in his teams. And he has someone who's good, they're not genius, but they're good. He'll take the person who's not genius. Because the only thing he doesn't want is he doesn't want people coming to project teams that are disruptive. People that don't accept diversity. People that don't accept people that are different to them. So we're going to come back to this ground rules. Ground rules is so important. Because what happens if you don't set ground rules? When conflict occurs, and conflict will always occur in a project because of the nature of a project, in that you get two areas. You get operational area that we'll touch on here, where that's your processes and routines that you do all the time. Whatever your job is, whatever you need to do. A project is a set period. There's a beginning and there's an end. And that can put incredible pressure. Because there's no tomorrow. You have a deadline for the project. If you don't meet the deadline, then there's a huge implication. So we're going to look at different models. We're going to look at, and you've done it already, and I'm going to mention it. You would have done it in second year. You're forming, remember, you're forming storming, norming model. And as a manager, and a lot of what we learn on project here is applicable to your everyday jobs and to your management jobs that you'll have, or that you're going to have, or you might have already. So this is where the subject's important. It's important because it's like a big pot of all the theories. Finance, teamwork, organizational behavior. So okay, we just chucked a couple down here. Be open-minded. Very important in this training. This training is for you. It's for you people. You're paying for this. A handy exercise that I always tell the people in finance is work out what you're paying and work out how many hours you're here. And work out the rand per hour, and it's quite significant. So people don't come to class like there's not that cost benefit. So okay, there's just a couple of things, one conversation at a time, listen carefully. Here's an important one, respect opinions of others. Doesn't mean you've got to agree. No one's saying you must agree with members of your team. Sometimes you've got to agree to disagree, but you need to work together. I just want to go through the outcomes to set the scene. There's one thing I haven't talked about in ground rules. Is it? What's that? And you're all thinking about it. Is time. How long is he going to keep us? It's Saturday. We have so much stuff to do. Hope he doesn't keep us till 4. What we're going to do, these times are set for us. We're going to have a break at 10 o'clock, because that's, and then 12 o'clock, because that's what they've set downstairs. How long do we need for tea? 30 minutes? Everyone happy with that?
Yes.
Lunch? How long do you normally take for lunch?
An hour. 30 minutes.
Oh, cell phones off. I forgot that rule. Hey, cell phones off. 2 hours, yeah.
45 minutes.
30 minutes as well?
45 minutes.
But for 2 hours is cool, but then we can stay until 5.
5.
That's negotiation. He wants to stay till 6. Should we have a vote on that?
Hey.
You're going to get beaten at lunchtime, you know that.
Give us 1 hour, sir.
Okay, let's make it
45 minutes.
Let's make it 45, because the longer we have lunch, then the longer we stay. And I know you all want to go home, you've got stuff to do. Okay, I just want to go through a couple of learning outcomes. Now, you guys are now old hands at this learning outcomes. You've survived a whole heap of exams, so you know kind of what you're doing. But very important with the learning outcomes, and I'll say it, you guys have heard me say it before, I'll say it again, some of you anyway, is you need to about to look at the learning outcomes and say, can I do this? So evaluate the feasibility of a project. Can I evaluate the feasibility of a project? Do I know how to? If I got a question that said, here's a project or a caselet, evaluate the feasibility, we're about to do it. And I always say to everybody, whatever level it is, and you're coming to senior level, you're coming to graduate level now, is that if you can answer the learning outcomes honestly, there's no exam that can fool you. Because one of the rules with exams is they must be within the learning outcomes. We can't ask you stuff that's out the learning outcomes. So you'll see each chapter in your study guide has 2 or 3 learning outcomes. When you've read through that section and done the digital and all that stuff, go back to the beginning and look at those learning outcomes and say, can I do this? And I tell you, if you do that, then you cannot but do very well. Okay, feasibility of a project. That's what we're going to be talking about today. It's our first section. Feasibility, in a way, I guess, means doability, isn't it? Is it possible? If you want to drill for oil in the Russian tundra, there's oil, you know there's oil there. But is it feasible? Because it's very expensive to drill through there. If you want to run a project in a country, maybe an African country, because we're Africans, so let's talk about Africa. Is it feasible? Is the country stable enough? In finance, you learned about, remember, net present value. Is the project going to yield a return? Why would you, unless it's a NGO or community project, why would you do a project if it's not going to yield a return? And remember, net present value, I know a lot of you want to block that out your mind, but you just go back to it a sec. What does net present value say? It says, what is my cost of capital and what return am I making on the project? Is it worth it? For example, I'm using oil examples because I've been reading quite a bit about it lately. So, in the oil industry, there's a whole lot of fields that are sitting. They've normally done tests, they've drilled. They haven't put a rig there, but they've drilled and they've capped the shafts. Why? Because at that certain oil price, it's not feasible. You can't have, when you're extracting oil, and the price of extracting is higher than the current price per barrel. Doesn't make sense, does it? But you'll see as oil gets shorter in supply, the price is going to go up. And then suddenly projects that were not worth it suddenly become worth it. So that's what feasibility is. It's about returns. It's about, can we do it? Is it possible with current technology? For example, one of the famous projects in the 70s was when they borrowed a tunnel between England and France. They call it the Channel. It's an underground tunnel, which is, it's basically 2 tunnels with trains going one way or the other way. That project was first thought of in about 1902 by an engineer. And when people suggested it at the time, or he suggested it, sorry, they laughed him off. They said he was a fool. It was impossible. But you see, in 1902, they didn't have the technology to drill under the sea like that. But in 1974, it became feasible because they had the technology. So that's the one project we're going to talk about. Compare complex and simple projects. Obviously, the more complex a project, the more difficult it is to manage. 2 or 3 of you might be working in a business and you might run a project, and it's quite simple. Low resource, fairly uncomplex needs. The one thing that causes complexity in a project is the more people you have involved in the project. Because the bigger the groups, it becomes difficult to manage. Also, you might have a project where you're in 5 countries and you're coordinating from one country. It becomes very, very difficult. So we're going to look at the different complexities. We're going to talk about one of the most dangerous things in projects, scope creep. And how do we manage it? And how do we recognize it? Risk assessment, all about risk assessment, isn't it? It's about what are the risks in the project? And how do we put contingency plans? So for example, every one of you, wherever you live, your municipalities have a emergency plan. So if there's a bomb, if there's a flood, if there's a fire, they have a plan of what to do, because having a risk plan doesn't mean that the risk might not occur, but you know what to do if it occurs. So if there's a flood, how do you deal with it? If there's civil unrest, how do you deal with it? What plan have you got in place?
So does it work with chaos?
Chaos.
Does it work with chaos?
Not always that well. But chaos can be different forms. Chaos can be floods, isn't it? Like floods cause chaos. So what do? Every year in California, we see on the news, we see the fires that rage there. What do? They have an evacuation plan. They evacuate people. They have an emergency plan where they pull resources in to stop the fire. Okay, so that's a contingency plan. A contingency plan is if the event occurs, how do we deal with it? Post-project analysis. One of the most difficult areas of project is post-project analysis. By the time the project comes to an end, everyone's pretty tired of each other. They're stressed. They work long hours. And people don't like to do post-mortems. A post-mortem is saying, what did we do right, but what did we do wrong? People don't want to talk about what they did wrong. It's like, it's difficult and it's painful to admit that you made mistakes. But what you normally do in the project world, you people write a report. So the next time you do a similar project, you go back and you look at the mistakes, because you don't want to repeat those mistakes. We're going to be looking at leadership. A project manager is a combination of a manager and a leader. They've got to be a little bit of a mixture of both. Integrate project management principles, explain operations. We're going to bring operations in next week towards the end. Ops management, we're going to bring a kind of taste of that in. Okay, so the first thing we do, if you want to run a project, remember a project could be starting your own business. It can be a project. It could be a building. It could be a whole lot of stuff. But for example, let's take up, sure some of you either have your own businesses or you're probably going to go into your own businesses. And that's a good example. If we look at going into a business, what do you look at? Guys chatter. They chatter. They always chatter. But it's okay. They keep it under control. The classic is a lot of you maybe won't get the job you want and you start your own business. And that's really where you should be thinking. What you look at it and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to sell that, I'm going to whatever it is. The first thing you do is it going to bring enough profit
Yes.
for me to survive and pay my bills and look after my kids or whatever I've got? And that's the first step, because if a project's not feasible, you're not going to spend a huge amount of resources on pursuing it. For example, you've all probably heard about that Shell fracking project, which we've talked about before in Karoo, where it's a process where they use pressure or they use different means to split the Earth's crust, and then you suck the gas out. It's a lot cheaper than drilling. But the feasibility study on that alone probably cost about 300 to 400 million rand. Because the whole project is probably an investment of about 2.5, 3 billion. So if they spent 100 million drilling, checking, and suddenly they see that the project is not going to make money, they just stop the project and they write off the difference. So whether you're opening your own business, whether you're going to do a building, whatever the project you're looking at, you first determine the feasibility. Because it could be like that engineer in 1902, who people laughed, they called him an idiot. They wanted to kick him out of the engineer society and everything. Because he had that vision of drilling under the sea, and it had never been done before. And in fact, when they did it in 1974, it also had never been done before. They had a huge amount of constraints on that project. But they evaluated and they believed it was feasible with the current technology. So let's just have a look at feasibility. We're going to stop, as I said, we'll stop at 10. We're going to do this section. Whether a project is viable. What is viable? Viable means a number of things. It's not only money. You could be running a social project in your community, or you want to. That's also viability. Do you have the resources? Does the community want it? Are you going to achieve your objectives? And the important thing here, and again, I'm using a business example because I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking along that line, and it's something you can identify with. You sit and do your business plan. Is it viable? Am I going to survive on this thing? Can I pay my rent? Am I going to make money? Do people want my product? Is my product viable? And also resources. One of the constraints that you have, for example, opening your own business is resources. You might have to buy equipment. You might have to get premises. You might have to get trucks. Now, do you have the resources? You don't want to tackle a project if you haven't got the resources, because then you are destined for failure. But you don't know the resources needed till you've done a feasibility. And of course, from a business perspective, and we are a business school, it's about profitability. Some of you might get involved in NGOs or social projects. Then it's not about profitability, is it? It's about an impact on the community. For example, just an example for those that are interested in NGO projects, you'll find if you want to run a project and you're looking for funding from UNESCO or United Nations or wherever it is, they make you do a full feasibility study. You want so many dollars for this project? How are you going to run it? What are the outcomes? What is the impact on the project? So in fact, what they get you to do is they get you to do a feasibility study before they give you the dollars. They want to know that the dollars that they give you have an impact. So let's have a look at this kind of overview. What the project? What is the project? What is the purpose or goal? Quite often, remember you in Project Management 2, you did the fishbone. You all remember the fishbone? The problem, Ichiwaka problem-solving model. The issue that I find is that in project is people don't understand the issue. So they put billions or millions of rand to try and solve the issue, and we see it very often. Where they pump billions of rand into a project, but it doesn't solve the problem, doesn't solve the issue. And what is the purpose of your project? Why do you exist in the why does the project exist? What are you trying to achieve? Remember our SMART goals? Specific, measurable, realistic, achievable, time-bound, etc. You speak to people in a project and they're not quite clear about the objective of the project. And everyone in your project team must be very clear about this. They need to understand it. They need to know what you're trying to achieve. They need to buy into what you're trying to achieve. Then you spend a lot of time on this. What is your objective? What are you trying to achieve? What is your goal of the project? We're trying to uplift the community, for example. What impacts do you want to make? How do you want the project to end? Then, of course, important the timeline. It's all about time. Those that start a project to start your own business will know that your biggest enemy is not capital. You can get capital, particularly at the moment, if you've got a good enough business idea. It's time. Time costs money. And the longer things take, the more time it costs. So, for example, you've managed to save 6 months' income or 8 months' income, for example. So, okay, I've got 8 months to get this project off the go and to start making money. But suddenly you find things take longer and longer. And suddenly, every month, the money that you've budgeted to live starts eating up. Because you're supposed to be making your first money in 3 months. It's now 5 months. You haven't made any money. Or a mining project. You aim with your exploration. Your exploration is your feasibility. Is there gold, platinum, whatever you're going for? Yes, there is. Can we extract it at a reasonable price? Yes, we can. Then you buy this billions of dollars worth of equipment and you start mining. But now it doesn't take you a year. It starts taking, because of constraints, it starts taking you 18 months to extract minerals out the ground. What's happening? It's your cost, isn't it? The longer your timeline, the more it starts costing you. You then work out your cost and budgeting. So now, is the project feasible? And that's why I gave the example of the oil fields. For example, Canada has got quite a lot of oil fields that are dormant at the moment because the oil price didn't support it. Because obviously you sell that oil at a certain price. So you do your cost and your budgeting. Then, in the case of a project like your startup business, you do your market analysis. Do people want whatever you're offering? It's no good having a product. And I've done that in my entrepreneurial state. You think the world's going to kill themselves to buy your product. And then you sit with the product and like, no one comes, you know. I'm here. So market analysis. For example, if you're doing, and that's what I was mentioning, the oil example. How do you believe the oil price is going to go over the next 5 years? Is it going to stay profitable? Are the Saudis going to flood the market again, as they've done a number of times? Because they don't want too many competitors in the market with the projects. So what they do is, if you flood oil in the market, you know you've done economics, hey? What happens to economics? You flood oil in the market. What happens to the price? Price drops. So that's your market analysis. For example, I was teaching when I first came back here. I was teaching, guys, please no crosstalk. I was teaching at a Tanzanian mine that had been going for about 12 years. It was Anglo-American mine. And it was open pit. Open pit's cheap to mine. You just scrape the ore up fundamentally from the pit and you process it. Now what's happened in the Tanzanian mine? The open pit is finished. So now they've got to start, guys, no crosstalk, please. Focus. You're a new face, are you? Are you old face? You changed your hair again. Okay. You lady, I told you earlier, ladies always fox me because you forever... So in this case now, they're faced with a dilemma because let's say the gold price has been running at about $1,100. They've managed to extract it about $850. So they've made a massive margin over the last 10 years. Now, all of a sudden, you've got to start drilling and you've got to start going underground. Now, that cost is very high. There's danger and there's... So suddenly they're relooking at their costs, and it's not going to cost $950 an ounce to extract. Or, sorry, they want $850. It's now going to cost $950. So now you're going to relook at your model. And again, you look at the gold price. If the gold price drops to 1,000 or 950, you're in deep trouble. For example, in the South African market, you must have read about a lot of the mines starting to talk about retrenching.
Yes.
Guys, please, let's focus. Guys, focus. Don't talk on your own.
We discussing this.
Okay. But then, like, share it with us. What happens in South Africa, for example, there are mines that now the cost of extraction is higher than the gold price because of market forces. Because of the fact that we've now got to, on average, drill down a kilometer, or we've got to mine a kilometer to extract it. So these are the realities of project management. So what they say is, like Anglo says, do we need to keep that mine? Because it's become marginal, or it's actually making a loss. So it's better than just to close the mine. Get rid of 2,000 people or whatever it is, and just mothball it. And hire 20 people to keep it going in security, make sure that the score miners don't go and take all your gold while it's closed. And kill themselves in the process. That's another issue. So this is the realities of projects, not just simple. For example, suddenly that mine that has been profitable for Anglo for 12 years is no longer feasible. But if the gold price goes to $1,300, it will be feasible. So these, at this stage, or even a new mine, Anglo will do this very, very carefully. And they'll do a forecast 20 years ahead. Then they'll work out the resources they need. Then they start the project. They start the project planning. So at this stage, if they believe it's not worth drilling another shaft in a mine, they'll just close the mine. Because what's the ultimate goal of business projects? Profitability. And of course, interesting, just on that, not to digress too much, but the mines have been trying to automate. So you send robots to do the drilling and that, but now the union's stopping that because they don't want. Once you've decided on the project, you then need to have a description. So the description says, what are we doing? What is our goals? What is our objectives? What is the business need? You probably talked in project before about a business model. A business model is what we've been talking about. So in other words, what is the feasibility of the project? What is the need? For business projects, you don't run a project if there's not a need. Either a need to solve an issue, problem, or in community projects, what is the need of the community? What issue are we trying to resolve? Problem to be addressed.
So what if it's a new project or idea?
In what type of project?
Well, let's make an example with social media, right? There was never a need for social media, but it came out of nowhere. So how do you then define that for the future forecast?
Okay, there would be, if it was social media, there would be a business need, wouldn't there? Communication need, advertising need.
Yeah.
It could be, for example, a blog. You're doing a project to open a blog.
Yeah.
Not always about profitability, particularly in the beginning, but it could be, and most social media is around business needs. Digital marketing, advertising. If you've got a blog, for example, often what you do is when the blog's going, you monetize it. So in other words, you turn it into a profitable venture. But it could be social media to tell people about social issues, resolve social issues. So I keep mentioning community and business because projects are not only about profitability. I'm sure some of you might or are already involved in community projects of some sort. So potential pitfalls, that's your risk, isn't it? So when you, for example, if you are putting a project forward to a lender, then what what you would do is you would put the risks, pitfalls of risks. So say, okay, what are the risks of the project? What is the need of the project? It could be United Nations funding you. It could be an investor. It could be a project you want to do in the business that you're going to work in. So you might have a project to, they're not all problems. I mean, you might have a project to optimize a business process. But that's a business need, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Might be efficiency, might be profit. Doesn't matter, but there's a business need there. How are you going to approach it? This is like kind of, in a way, like an executive summary of what you're going to do, how your execution is, how you're actually going to do it. What resources do you need? Remember in our last slide, that's your cost and your cost estimates. People, what people do you need? What organizations do you need? So quite often this will be, in a business, you go to your boss and you'd say, I believe we should run this project. We need to fix customer resource management. We need to launch a new product. There's 100 things that you can think about. And very often at this stage, you've done feasibility, you've done a project description, and you now come with an initial budget. If I may use an example in a business school, you might have a big company that wants you to train. So quite often at this stage, you haven't spent resources or a lot of resources. And this is part of that feasibility and what you would do, in effect, let's take a startup. You would do a business plan, you would explain all of this, and you would go to lenders like the banks, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. You say, this is what I'm doing, this is a feasibility, can you fund me? Mm-hmm. Often in a business, if you come up with a good business idea, and I would hope that you guys show that initiative when those are maybe some of you working, probably most of you not yet. When you see a need, you go and you say to the management, here's an opportunity or here's a need. Let me run a project. You do your feasibility, you do your project description, you take them and say, this is what I believe this business needs. And then it's a great way of getting ahead in your careers. And remember, it doesn't have to be a multi-million thing. It could be a project to make a customer interaction process better, or to improve a delivery of goods. Or, the thing is with projects are not always multi-million things. It could be an idea you've had to improve something. But what's important with a project description, that is clear, concise, complete, and credible. So often in my example at the business school, they ask you to come up with a project proposal. What's it going to cost? How are you going to do it? They normally give you the objective. Maybe we need to train 500 people over the next year, for example. So they give you the overall objective. You come up with a project proposal or description on how you're going to do it. So these factors we've been talking about. How are you going to train people in different towns? What resources are you going to use? What material are you going to use? And then, here's just a couple of things to remember here. It must be clear, concise, complete, and credible. So you don't come up with stuff that is not feasible. And it's got to be clear. So if you bring your project proposal to me, I should be very clear about what you're trying to do. And it all starts, and I know you've done it in second year, but it all starts with your SMART objectives. Specific objectives. I want to improve the customer process, so the interaction time with the customer goes from 15 minutes to 8 minutes, or whatever it is. I want to improve it by a certain time in the next 3 months, 4 months, 2 months, whatever your time is. Because if this is not clear, then your description is not going to be clear. You need to understand very, very clearly what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do. And also complete's very important. You don't leave important details out, like how many people you need, resources you need, time you need. So that is the next very important stage. Then, of course, if you go back, this is all describing that diagram I showed earlier. Timeline. You now need to do the time, because what I've found in projects, which is one of the biggest downfalls, you underestimate the time. So you say that job will take 2 days. That job will take 3 days. Meanwhile, when you come to do the job, each job takes you 5 days. So what you do is you start using your time. And time is money, particularly if you're employing outsourcing. And just talking about that outsourcing at this forum, the guys were saying the way jobs are going to be is going to change dramatically. There'll be a lot of outsourcing. So in other words, they want you to design a website. Or here we had a social, let's use your example. They want you to do a social media campaign for them. They don't want to employ you on a permanent basis. They might do 3 or 4 campaigns a year. So what they do, they give you the brief. They expect you to work at home. They expect you to have your own equipment. And they will pay you for that job. So very often in projects, you outsource a lot of stuff. Even if you look at major roads projects, all the equipment is hired. So you hire equipment, you outsource labor, you outsource functions. But the problem with that is that every hour that you have people, you're paying for. So if you, for example, and it happens a lot, if you look at projects like Medupi is a good example of a project that's gone years over deadline. They bring people in from overseas. They brought overseas people in as well, consultants. Then suddenly there's a labor dispute. So you're paying a consultant many dollars a day to come help you, and he's just sitting there, or she's just sitting there. So in projects, time is everything. And you need to make sure that you estimate your time requirements very, very clearly. Because again, what I said earlier with the project, and you guys know it from doing project before, it has a beginning and it has an end. There's no tomorrow. There's a deadline that you've got to achieve. So the longer you take to do tasks, because you underestimate the tasks, you don't realize how big the task is. So you start using time. Maybe you've got to crash the project deadlines and you've got to hire more resources. So now you've got more cost. Because you thought a team of 10 people could do it. Now within the deadline, you're finding you need 15 people. So of course what happens is your cost increases. So one of the things that guys remember from last year, work breakdown structure. If you look at, for example, any project management software like MS Office is a good example. You spend a huge amount of time putting the work breakdown structure in. Remember the work breakdown structure? And that was who, when, how. And remember, you broke your tasks into little tasks. So with the little chunks, you broke it down into every single task that you're to do. Then you allocated time, and then remember you added it all up to get your total time. So the work breakdown structure, no matter how sophisticated the project, this is your most critical planning tool. Because what happens if you don't do it very well? You skip tasks. And often skipping tasks means you underestimate your resources needed and you underestimate your time. And time is your biggest enemy. So if you're sitting at the planning stage, often what will happen is that you put in your proposal, it gets approved. Because you don't want to spend millions of rand planning if you haven't got the job. That's the kind of reality. So what will happen is that you will then get the job, and now you've got budgets, you've got top budgets, you've got top objectives. Remember, you've got your project description we talked about, and you now come down to the actual. So if I can carry on using the business school example, if I may, what happens, the company will give you the job. You need to train so many people over a year period. The work breakdown structure is then taking that down to the actual classes, the actual people, the resources. What do you have to do? What books do you have to prepare? What material? And also we'll look at network diagrams. Network diagrams are the timing. So if I may just carry on with a class example, I think we can all relate to it. You can't give the class until you've designed the material and printed the material. You can't go into class without material. So what you've got to do, and we'll have a look at some scheduling, you schedule the tasks in the order that they need to occur. So the simple example we did you probably remember in Project Management 1, we want to build a house. The first thing you ought to do is get municipal approval. I think a lot of you remember that example. Then you've got to build the foundation. You can't build the walls until you build the foundation. You can't put the roof on until you have the walls. I know it's a very simplistic example, but that's the principle of it, is that you need to know in what order you've got to do tasks. And also you look at how long each task can take. So you do your work breakdown structure. Then what you would do in reality, you'd put it into project management software, MS Office. Trello is an agile, quite a popular agile one. You would then enter it in, and what the system does is it then schedules for you. And if there's scheduling clashes, so for example, if I've scheduled you, and I've scheduled you, same job, same time, it tells you there's a clash. You can't both be in different towns at the same time, to give an example. So this, but you see, the thing that I always try and stress in these classes is that software is not a magic panacea or a magic solution. Your computer software works on your work breakdown structure that you've thought through and you've planned. So if you put a poor work breakdown structure in, you can have millions of rand of software. It doesn't help you. Which is one of the main reasons why you'll find on major projects, like a building project, people will outsource the building, they'll outsource the plumbing, they'll outsource preparation. Because the people that do that all the time. They've done 100 or 200 of them. So they have their work breakdown structure very sorted. That's why people will outsource to experts. Now comes the difficult part of this feasibility. Because now you've got to estimate your costs. And there's a number of estimating techniques that we'll use. But cost estimation is very, very difficult. If you take a project, let's take an Anglo project that you're going to mine in one of the African countries. You do your cost and your revenue as best you can. But that's a 25-year project. Remember time value of money? Net present value. The further we go into the future, we remember we discounted money because of the deterioration of money into the future and also the uncertainty. So This is one of the most difficult parts, particularly if you are quoting for a job. So you quoting for, maybe it's a government tender or maybe private tender or whatever it is. You have to do your estimates. And often you don't have total actuals to use. You've got to estimate as best as you can. Then obviously if you overestimate, then very often you don't get the job because you've outcosted yourself. If you underestimate, you might get the tender or you might get the job, but now you're not going to make money. And it's a big challenge with government projects that the people cut the pricing to get the project, but they haven't estimated their costs correctly. So what happens, you have, again, back to finance, a lot of finance in here, you have a working capital problem because you're using all your working capital to get the project going, and you've underestimated your resource needs. And then, of course, if you underestimated your resource needs, then what happens is your profitability suffers because your cost structure is higher than when you did your feasibility study, then put your proposal in, you estimated a certain level of costs. Now you come to the reality, and those costs are different to what you estimated. And I mentioned a tender on purpose because a tender, there's not normally any flexibility for increasing your price. You go in at a certain price, particularly government tenders. So this is a hectic part of project planning, is estimating the costs. The better your work breakdown structure, the better your cost estimates will be. And of course, as you know from second year, that once you've done your estimates become your budget. That's what you measure your expenditure again. So you'll say, okay, that part of the project, we estimate it's going to cost 10 million. What does it actually cost us? If you're going over cost, then it's a problem. And then unfortunately what happens in some projects is that the people underestimate, or the guys who apply for it underestimate the cost, then they start cutting quality to save cost. Because remember, your price is now fixed. You can't go back and say, no, but I want a bigger price, I want a better price, I want a higher price. Your costs are now fixed. And your revenue is fixed. So those of you that go into government contracts, tenders, you've got to be very, very careful. And also that the payments tend to be quite late, so now you're spending more and more money, but you're not getting your revenue back. So it's a very profitable area and a very good area of opportunity. But when you do your project estimates, you've got to do them very, very carefully to make sure that you're making enough margin, profit margin to survive. So these expenditure estimates that you do become your benchmark or your baseline. So that's what you measure the project expenses against. We said this phase would cost that. What's it actually costing? And a lot of it depends on the type of project. And there are three estimations that we use. We use order of magnitude, indicative, definitive. And what I suggest is, let's have our break a little early, and we come back at about 1:15. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool.